Welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. Listen in as we discuss all things business, growth and marketing with business owners, thought leaders and entrepreneurs. And now, here's your host, founder of Roundhouse, the creative agency, Saul Edmonds.
Oh, hey, everyone. Welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. I'm talking with Jeff Greenfield today. Jeff, how are you on this sunny day, apparently?
Apparently, as we talked about before we got on here, Saul, it's very sunny here in New England, but we experienced an earthquake today, which is very strange in our part of the country. But it was definitely a wake-up call for a Monday.
Literally.
Definitely.
It is. So were you actually, because I'm just trying to visualize you being asleep and then shaking, and then because I've never experienced an earthquake, so I can only sort of imagine, like you see video footage of it happening, but I could only imagine what it would actually be like.
Well, my first earthquake in California, my wife and I were in bed and it woke us up. And I was like kind of excited because it was my first earthquake. I wasn't from California. And I was like, oh my God, this is an earthquake. This is so cool.
That's so funny.
And then the shaking gets worse. And if it had stopped at that point, you would be like, oh, okay, yeah, this wasn't so bad. But the shaking got worse and it continued for like another 30 seconds and it felt like several hours. This one, I was in the middle of a call with clients and I hear this shaking sound and it sounds like snow falling off my roof, but then my desk started to shake more.
Oh, good.
And I said, I have to go downstairs and check on something because I think that could be an earthquake. And they kind of chuckled like, how can that be? But it actually was an earthquake. It was quite surprising. And, that's what the world is all about and business is all about is about these little surprises that come up when you're least expecting them.
Yeah. And little earthquakes then sometimes too. Hey, like you've got, is that unusual for your part of the world?
It definitely is. I mean, we get them, if you follow this type of stuff, they'll tell you that little ones happen all the time type of thing. But this is the first one in my recent memory that I remember experiencing, since, 1988 of living in this area. So, yeah, I'd say this is the first big one that I remember.
Yeah, this is the part of the podcast that I always find, like, outside of all the really good stuff that we get into during the podcast, I always find this particular part really interesting, like being in Brisbane, Australia, for people who are listening who aren't in this area, and then talking to people all around the world. It still kind of blows my mind that we can even do this. Like, you get so used to it with technology too, which we'll talk about, soon with what you do, but the fact that we can just sort of sit here and talk about this is still amazing to me. Like, it's still, most of the time I don't really think about it. So like, hey, just talking on Zoom. And then, but let's dive into, so for people who have no idea, like, who is Jeff Greenfield? Jeff, who are you? And what do you get up to? Like, what's your, currently at least, like, what's your primary thing that you help people with?
Yeah, so I'm Jeff Greenfield. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Provalytics. Prova is an Italian word that means proof, and I help marketers prove that what they're doing is actually working. There's this old adage in marketing that says half the money I spend in marketing is wasted. The only problem is I don't know which half. And
I remember that one.
Yeah, that was back from the mid part of the last century.
Who said
when there
that?
Was really,
That's right. That's a good quote. That's a good quote. Yeah, I forgot that one.
From Thomas Wanamaker, who was one of the first department store folks. And that was back when there was no TV, maybe radio and print. That was it. So
And
there's
there was
only,
no real analytics then either, except for, I guess, like hearsay and word of mouth. Hey.
right. But think about it. Back then, there was only two places to put your dollars. Now it's
Mm,
hundreds of places with these individual campaigns and different creatives. And so the quote is still true today, but it's more of a problem than ever before because you have all these different types of marketing that are all working supposedly together, sometimes at odds with each other. And it's near to impossible. Just in recent memory, if you think about like e-commerce folks, where, 5 years ago, the whole focus was to sell stuff on a website and you're doing digital marketing, TV and radio, and you're mentioning the name of your website to get people to come there. And you got all this great analytics. And now all of a sudden, overnight, Amazon is 50% of your business. And then overnight, let's say Walmart is 15% of your business here in the States. But your analytics only looks at your website. I mean, how in God's name are you supposed to figure this stuff out with the tool set that's there? And so we solved that problem for marketers utilizing very sophisticated analytics that are statistically sound, that are kind of a cross between the way things used to be done before digital and the way that things used to be done before all these privacy changes. So we give marketers
right.
what they need in order to make the best decisions.
Sure. So when I'll just sort of start some of these questions by, I guess, trying to address what people who, like even people who are in our general industry, because I'm in the design sort of marketing industry too. We don't do any marketing, so we work with like marketing people. But when people hear, because everyone like always sees little things pop up in front of websites about cookies, and I would hazard to guess that most people would kind of, like a lot of things, people think they know what that actually means, or sort of what that is, but probably like in terms of the technical aspect of what they do and why they're there and their purpose, because you're like you can expand upon this, but as first sort of addressing about what cookies are and then why they've sort of been important and where they are now in terms of what you do, like their purpose or their lack of purpose also, or their lack thereof. Can you just sort of expand on that? Give a definition, because you're probably going to be like way, way, way better than I am anyway. So it's partially for me, actually, to be honest.
I'll do my best. I mean, cookies from the internet perspective are really one of the foundational tools as to why we have the World Wide Web as it stands today. The internet is one of these cool things. It's free when you think about it. And it used to be, up until a couple of years ago, you could go to pretty much any news site for free. And that's because the internet was designed to work with an advertiser supported model. And the more places you go, the more ads you see. And then that is how sites earn their income. And, in the early days, it's pretty straightforward. But then what was happening is that, you start to see an ad for a product and they're advertising heavily. And it gets frustrating to folks when you see the same ad like 95 times a day.
Yeah.
Because that's been shown to have like once I see it everywhere, it's like, I hate it, stop showing it to me type response. It actually has the negative response to it. And so there's ways. They know that you don't want to show someone an ad more than like 3 to 5 times a day. And so in order to put controls on that, they decided to utilize some of this backbone technology, which are cookies. All a cookie really is a little tiny text file that sits on your computer. And there's two types, first party and third party. A first party cookie, a good example of that is when you go in your browser to Amazon.com and you're automatically logged in, that's a first party cookie. You go to Amazon.com, you go to load it, and as it's loading, Amazon.com says, hey, do I know who you are? I'm going to look for my cookie. And it looks on your machine and it's looking for a cookie that is Amazon because you're on Amazon. It's first party. And it sees a cookie, probably sees a bunch of things. And it says, I wonder if I see a hash, like a hidden username and password. And it says, oh, I do. I'm going to log you in automatically. And that's how you're able to do that. So it's part of that seamless experience. The other part that's important to advertising is when you go to a news site and you see an ad for something, they will have a third-party cookie. And a third-party cookie means you may be on the New York Times website, but they may drop a cookie for DoubleClick, which is an ad-serving technology. And what they'll say is they'll just put a count 1 for this particular ad ID. And then when you go to your next website, when the site loads, that ad server will say, hey, do you have a DoubleClick cookie? You do. Do you have an ID for this ad? You do. What's your number at? 1. I'm going to show you that ad again, and let's change it to 2. And it does that. And then you go to another site and it changes it to 3. And then the next time it happens, it won't change it anymore because it knows you've reached the maximum for that day. So essentially, every time you go to a website, even though it seems like it's seamless, there are all this real-time activity going on. On most websites, there's actually a real-time auction that goes on. And they look at the cookie and they say, how much am I bid on this person from this part who just came from this page? And it appears like they like driving Volvos and smoke cigars. How much am I bid? And it's a real-time auction. And whoever wins that auction, the ad shows up. And I know it sounds kind of silly that this all happens as the page is loading, but it actually does. That's how sophisticated this technology is. So those third-party cookies, the ones that enable the ability to count so they know how many times you've seen an ad, those same cookies are also used to target you so that you get shown things that are interesting to you. Like if you're on a website and looking at a pair of shoes and you go to another website and you see the same picture because you haven't purchased it yet. And it's also used to measure the effectiveness of ads so they know who's actually seen the ad so they can connect all the dots together. And that is how the ad industry has functioned for many years is through these cookies. And it would have gone on that way for many, many, many years. But there was this event that occurred in the EU a number of years ago where they passed this new regulation called the GDPR. And that essentially said, hey, you know, you've got all these profiles built up of people that drive Volvos and smoke cigars, and you've collected all this data throughout the years. Guess what? That list doesn't exist anymore here in the EU. You have to get rid of that list. You can rebuild it, but in order to rebuild it, you have to ask people, do you want to be part of this list? And that set off a series of seismic events in the advertising industry, in the digital advertising industry, that changed things dramatically. That was the first kind of domino that fell.
Yeah, that's a very good sort of historical context answer too. Thank you, Jeff. That was good. Because it's, you know, it's like various things that happen on the internet when you're browsing, and after a while you just become immune, and people, you know, I mean, happens to me all the time with different sites you go to where you see that, and it relates to the EU, and most people would have no idea about, one, the context, two, the sort of historical context of how it came to be at that point, and then why that's even sort of happening. Because then you say, and this is like from your description about Provalytics, a cookieless AI-driven attribution solution enabling marketers to prove the impact from upper funnel channels like CTV and grow budgets. What do you reckon? I'm it sounds like I'm part of Probalytics. But like the cookieless part. So now that we've sort of established cookies generally, where does the cookieless AI-driven part, like as this fundamental aspect of what you do, can you sort of expand on that a bit more for people?
Yeah, absolutely. So that first domino fell, and there was this whole series of other events where you can't get all of that data anymore. The data now is somewhat, dare I say, hidden or locked, if you will. Like, for example, with Facebook is not going to give you that user level data. And back in the day when things were more open, we would be able to collect all of this data and use it for analysis. So marketers are somewhat blinded in terms of being able to know what works. A great example is that if I run ads on Facebook, I only know when someone clicks through on Facebook, because typically what happens in a Facebook environment is someone's scrolling, they see a bunch of ads on Facebook, they see a bunch of ads on Instagram, and then maybe a couple hours later, the next day, they say, oh yeah, I want to check that thing out. And they go and they Google it, and then they click on the ad that they see in Google. And so the only way that you would know that Facebook actually worked is if you actually saw that the person who ended up buying actually saw the ad. But you can't get that information anymore. You can't get it from Amazon. You can't get it from most places where people are advertising at. And so we need a new way to measure. And back before digital, we used a method called marketing mix modeling. And this was a strong statistical technique, and it was a project. It was a lot of data that you had to collect and put it all together. And this data enabled you to be able to see what the relationship was with the ads you had out in the marketplace and the impact on sales. Because if you remember, before digital, there wasn't anything people clicked on. You ran a TV ad and someone walked into your store.
Yeah. There
was no way to really tell. But marketers got used to the ability to see all of that data and to get to that very nitty-gritty, down to the little intricate details of how things worked at that campaign level. And so at Probalytics, we took the science from the past and we merged it with the techniques that have been in use for the last 20 years to create a platform that doesn't rely on user level data. So we respect that privacy. So we don't need cookies. We're not interested in how someone traverses the web and how many times they saw an ad. We only get daily data, and then we let the math, the statistical data, the machine learning, and the AI kind of put it all together and figure things out for us, which is very, very cool. What's interesting, even more so, is that the math that we use is actually very old math. We use a technique. One of the techniques has been around since the 1700s. I'm not kidding. And it's a technique called Bayesian, which is what's driving most of the AI and machine learning. Folks use it because it tends to work the same way that human beings think. When we have a series of choices, we tend to go with our best guess.
But that relates to the Bayesian curve, right? Like that
exactly
would be a
right.
part of, which I don't really think about. I mean, I sort of know about, but I use all the time. Like that's like a fundamental mathematical aspect of doing sort of graphics, like in vector graphics, that is. Like the best.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, and the fact, but I think I actually read about it a long time ago, and because I was curious, but most of the time I just do it. Like that's really interesting, Jeff. And so what was the, I guess the impetus or initial inspiration for using that particular mathematical process? Like how did that arise? Is there like a story behind that?
Well, the story is I've been in this space since 2008. I built a company before in this space and scaled it up and exited that company right before the pandemic. And I had become aware of this technique because we had used it in some of our own mathematical formulas, but I'd never used it at the scale that I've used it at now. Also, the math that we're doing, we could have probably done 10 years ago, but the computers are so much faster now. 10 years ago, it would have taken us 3 weeks, maybe
It's
a
like
month.
that's like a driving force now, isn't it? Just
It
the
really is.
AI explosion.
So we can really accomplish a lot now in terms of the speed at which we can do things. And also because it is really good at figuring out what is the best option, much more so than older school techniques. And it works great for the larger data sets that we're dealing with. And plus, it's actually pretty cool that you're using something that was created by a preacher in the 1700s. I mean, that's kind of cool, I think, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And some things obviously they don't really become old in that classical way that people think about them because they never were in the first place. They were just base principles that were, I guess, there but were discovered, as opposed to it's like that debate that I've heard every now and again that I always find really fascinating, and I've never like delved into it myself, but I find it a really fascinating debate as to whether mathematics is sort of intrinsic to the universe, like as a thing, or whether it's an invention. You know, it's a or whether it's a human kind of like invention to like understand things and the universe, and or whether it's like a discovery. I've always found that a really like interesting idea because like it's to me it makes more sense that it's sort of a discovery because you see it in everything, like you sort of see it. So if it was more of like an invention, my thinking is you wouldn't see that, like even like, you know, which is different, say with the Bezier curve and that sort of idea, because it's applied to software and, you know, it requires, you know, these sort of mathematical processes to actually do them. But it's an interesting debate. And you hear that now with sort of, to some extent with AI too, not exactly the same thing, but this sort of evolution of how that actually works. So like I'll just like take a step back because we didn't really find out sort of at the start, which I'd usually do in a different order, but as to your background, as to how you came not only to this point now, but like you were saying before, you had this other company. So before that, what was your background and what were you doing that led you to this point? Like, how did you like have this interest? Was it something at a very early age, or did you stumble across it, or, you know, what's the story behind that?
Well, I'm a marketer at heart. You know, I'm not a numbers guy at all.
Right.
So I didn't wake up one morning and say, "Hey, I want to get into the numbers world." That wasn't it. I started my career, if you will, in business as a magician. That's how I got my
Really, like a
start,
real magician.
like a real magician, yeah. And
Oh.
I specialized in close-up magic with cards and coins.
Ah.
And I paid my way through college. And then I went to grad school in California. And when I was there, I worked at the Magic Castle in Hollywood, which is a famous private club for magicians and their guests only. And I decided to go into the healthcare field and become a chiropractor because I used my hands and that's what I did.
Right.
So I
That's like a
went to,
natural. That's interesting because as soon as you said that, I was like, wow, that's incongruous. But then in the next split second, I was like, oh no, that actually makes complete sense because I've got a general interest because I always find it really fascinating about watching sort of magic, especially really good sleight of hand stuff. And I was like, wow, it's amazing. That's like a real physical like skill. Like it's pretty like, it's a hardcore kind of skill. So that makes a lot of sense in terms of translating that same sort of skill.
yeah, it was, I liked and I loved helping people just as much as I loved entertaining them. So I opened a practice up back here in New England and uh, built a business. And then I was injured in a car accident and crushed a nerve in my arm, your funny bone nerve
Right.
called your ulnar nerve, and needed to have surgery. And the surgery didn't work well. And I decided I would hire other doctors to work for me. And I was young, I was in my late 20s, and I built the practice up where I had about 70 employees. I wasn't prepared for it and I wasn't having fun. I got into healthcare because I wanted to help people. I didn't want to manage people.
Yeah.
I was okay managing my patients, but not managing employees. And so I was unhappy and I got out. I got rid of the business and I didn't know what to do. So I went back on the road and I did magic at colleges for a couple of years. This is like around the mid 90s, right around the time that the internet was starting. And I needed a website. I hired a company to make a website for me and they couldn't finish it in time. So I had to teach myself how to do it because I had bought ads with this domain that I had purchased, magic-magic.com. You can look it up on archive.org still.
Wow,
And
that's a good one.
it was a good one, yeah.
Yeah.
Magic.com was taken. So um and then I started touring colleges and when I did, I would update my website and other performers would be like, "Hey, who's your webmaster? This is amazing how your website is up to date." And I'm like, "Well, I don't have a webmaster. I'm on this journey to try to figure out what I want to do next. And I'm updating it myself." And they're like, "Can you help me?" And I'm like, "Sure." And so after about a year and a half, I got off the road because I had clients that I was helping with their websites. So now I was doing consulting mainly. And I was living the dream of every entrepreneur. I was working from my unheated basement,
Of
which was
course.
completely different than being on stage in front of several hundred people every night. But at least I was home. And I did that for a couple of years. I started up another company called Position Solutions, which was an automated SaaS software to get you to the top of the search engines. That we ended up doing very well with the emerging real estate and legal industry. And then I started doing some work in product placement and branded entertainment using my own tool set so that I could become the expert in that space. And one of the clients, and when I did that, we would get things on television and then I created a couple of large scale programs for some very large brands. One of them, Verizon Wireless, another a pharmaceutical company. And then I had a weight loss company that had questions. We were doing a branding campaign for them and they had questions about their digital spend. I became friendly with the CEO and he asked me, "Can I take a look at it? Did the numbers make sense?" And he sent me a spreadsheet and the numbers didn't make sense. What he was paying was ridiculous. And he asked me if I could help him. And I said, sure. So I put together a team of like some of the top media buying experts in the US that I knew. And immediately they started coming to me with these problems. And one of the problems was that for every sale that's made, there are 5 different partners, ad vendors, who are saying, "I'm the one who gets credit for that sale." And so
Right.
since the brand was paying a commission for every sale, they were paying 5 commissions out.
Yeah, because
for
everyone
every
was
sale.
saying the same thing, of course.
Right. And there was
Yeah.
no way to check who was actually truthful. We were all trusting them. And they weren't doing anything wrong because they didn't know about the other partners. So we needed a centralized way to tell what was going on. And the way to do that was to get an ad server, but that was going to cost $80,000 a month. And the CEO didn't want to spend that. I don't blame him. And he says, you got to come up with something else. So I had an idea and I thought I could build it because I had a team of technology people that were working on another project. So I took them off of it and we started building out this rudimentary platform that would deduplicate and figure out who should get credit, and then added in other pieces to it. And I thought I was building something just to solve this client's problem. And then I started talking to other people and found out they had the same problem. And then before I knew it, I actually had people that wanted to buy this tool. And that became my first kind of entree into this business. And that was 2008. And then I built that company up to about 65 employees. And then in 2019, I exited that business thinking I would never go back again. I thought I've done 12 years in measurement.
Famous last
I don't know
words.
I don't know what I want to do next, but I think I've done my time. And then over the course of a year or two, that GDPR thing happened, the dominoes fell. We
Right.
have now what's called walled gardens. That big iOS update happened. And what I realized is that what I had built before that was working so well for my clients, friends, and colleagues was no longer going to work. And I had this theory that we could do the same type of thing, but using not user level data, but using aggregated daily data, and did some tests and it worked. And I was like, oh my God, this is pretty cool. And so that is what led to building out Provalytics.
That's a fantastic origin story, and you explained it really well. And for me, sort of listening to it, like I always, I'm not sure what it is about me that's it's maybe just maybe it's just the way I think, sort of the creative process. I always automatically tend to make links between different seemingly incongruous sort of aspects, like the fact that the whole time you were talking, like I was still thinking about how interesting it was that you were a magician and the skills that go into something like that I've often sort of thought about. I've thought there's some serious sort of, skills in terms of like problem solving too, because there's a lot of like problem solving for like you want to make, I almost feel like what you ended up doing is kind of the opposite, not the opposite, but like the same problem solving, sort of process that you've gone through, but the other way around, because you would have to do a trick, like, and say if you made your own trick up, then you have to work out like what process you're going to go through to make that illusion or that trick actually work. So you got to go through all these actually pretty mechanical steps, and the end result is just sort of seamless, and people are like, wow, that's amazing. And then, but then now you've got a visible sort of problem, and you ran through some of those things that people, they've got all this information and it's like, it's there and it's completely transparent. And then you have to like unveil the mystery of that. Like it's sort of the other way around in a way. You got to like unveil the mystery of that, which like often people like have to do anyway. They even look at Google Analytics. I mean, this is like a story of my life. I'm not a super big analytics person, but because we do sites and then people and we, hook up their Google Analytics and do all that stuff, like a lot of people do. And then people are like, I actually have no idea what any of that means. Like I just look at all the numbers and I go, hey, look, I get it. Like, let's just start with like really, really simple things that just don't even look in the other stuff because it's just going to muddy the waters. But then you coming to this point to me is like, it seems anyway, and maybe you can sort of like expand upon this. It seems to me, like the same sort of like skill set that you're obviously like quite good at in those early days with magic, of having to do like some serious problem solving, I'm sure, like as to like how to actually make this stuff happen and look like it's completely seamless, that same problem solving sort of creative problem solving skill set has been like transferred to then this and this and this, which I often find like that seems to be like a common thread with, when you make something happen, when you make like a business happen or do this and this, there's that sort of combination of just kind of sticking at it, of just, sheer persistence. That's like a super important part. And then like, problem solving and, just the willingness to go, probably a big majority of problem solving and creative problem solving ends up not working out, which is how you get to like the right stuff, and being kind of, okay with that. Like it's never pleasant because like you got to go through like a million things to get to like the good stuff, but that's how it is. Like, sometimes you get more lucky and you stumble across the right answer like earlier, but that problem solving, right? Like of sort of like having to get to it. And so now with like at what point in that journey with what you're doing now with Provalytics because like the whole sort of AI, let's call it the AI explosion, just because that sounds kind of dramatic, and to have like when that was around, because that's like all come around so fast and it's changed so quickly. When in this journey did you and your team and everyone kind of, have stumbled across that and introduced that into what you've got now? At what point did that actually happen? Was that like a bit of like you explained it before really well, but was there more of a specific like light bulb moment where you go, this is going to be this sort of introduction in this particular way? Or was it that reverse engineering sort of problem solving thing and then it just happened to be there?
It was more the same type of problem solving that you kind of hit upon, which was that we knew that putting these old school techniques together using the power of the computers and the faster CPUs would work. But the way that we use AI is probably a lot different than what most people think. When you think about AI today, you think about ChatGPT or these other platforms where you can go and ask an amazing question and get a detailed answer, or ask it to write a book for you and it'll just spit it out. And really the current generation of AI is really like a word guessing machine, which is what it is. That's how they function. We use AI in that we have a 4-part machine learning process. And the way it was designed is part 1 gets done. A human being looks at it, examines it, does some calculations, and then based upon that makes a decision on how to proceed next. And so when we first put it together, there was a level of human intervention that had to be there in order for the process to complete, in order to have an output. And what we did is that we designed AI to take over so that there's no human intervention that happens. So it's not like we take data and send it out to ChatGPT and ask it for an answer. We have our own little internal AI that essentially acts as a human. And we've trained it to do what a human being would do. Yeah. And that's kind of the level of where things are at right now with AI. But most of AI today is really, it's read everything that's ever been written, and it knows what should be the next word to go. And that's really what ChatGPT is a word guessing machine. That's why it can write emails, write love letters better than anyone in any style you want, or you can create your own style, and you're like, wow, that thing is writing really, really well, really well. It's a great writing partner.
It's occasionally though I've found, and this will probably change soon enough, because it's like because it's machine learning and it's constantly just going, okay, I've been caught out. People still realize like I'm not a person, and then it gets better. It's like the occasional, which I sort of see, especially in especially in like the huge explosion, which you probably would have seen on YouTube, of like AI created videos. They're still all sort of largely in slow-mo. They're still all like, sort of like, things which kind of initially just looks like it's an intentional, like film technique, but there's so much of it now that people, and then there's sort of strange glitches still, like someone will sprout an extra head, or it doesn't quite understand it, but that's fast.
Or the six fingers.
Six fingers.
My favorite.
Yeah. And it's sort of amusing at the moment, because like I don't think people, and I know it's already happening with all the deep fakes and everything, but I don't think people will find it as amusing, like probably sooner than we think, where it starts to, imitate things more accurately, and then people can't discern, because people, I feel like that's like in a funny way, like even I'll just return to magic because I like sort of metaphors, as like, forgive me everyone, but like that people know that magic is not, supernatural, right? And they know it's a trick, but it's still magical. Like it's still amazing. And you go like, wow, how did you do that? And some more than other ones, like people know it's a trick, and people still know at the moment that like AI is AI, and that's an AI, created video or sort of helped along with this, that they know that. But I'm not sure people will be so happy at a certain point in this curve where they can't discern anymore, because that feels, well, I can only speak for myself, because that feels like once you are unable to discern things, there's like that it starts to go downhill in terms of like trust and like understanding. It's like if I'm talking to you or talking to somebody, and you think like the whole time we've been talking, or have known like Jeff Greenfield for like 2 years, and then one day Jeff goes, actually I'm like this or that, and I go, whoa, really? You've been lying the whole time? You're like, no, you just never asked. Like you just like, you didn't realize I was like part of the Iranian post-revolutionary guard, or whatever, or like some crazy stuff.
I left that out of my bio.
Yeah. I was like,
also,
really?
It's also
Jeff,
like, it's also like
Jeff.
when folks see me do a card trick, they immediately don't want to play cards with me after that. So it's the same thing that's true with AI. But AI, what's fascinating about AI is how quickly the developments are coming.
Yeah.
We're now at this point where they're able to put together different actions. And I saw a demo and read an article about this weekend that, gave an example of like, if I wanted to buy tickets to go on a tour of the Colosseum in Rome, the way that I would do that is, and I actually just did this several months ago, and I spent about 3 hours or so researching. I went to TripAdvisor, I read all the ratings, found the one that I wanted, and then I clicked to buy it. And that whole process went through Google. Google got paid. TripAdvisor probably made a commission and all of those things. But the demo I saw is I can type into ChatGPT with their new settings and say, hey, find the top rated tour for the Colosseum in Rome. I'm going to be on these dates. I want to go during this time frame, and buy the tickets. And it did it. completely bypass that. So the way that the web has operated financially, because that's what we've been talking about, because TripAdvisor gets a commission. That's essentially advertising. That they're an advertising supported company. That's going to change. It's going to change literally overnight, very, very quick. And very soon they're going to turn ads on inside of ChatGPT and Perplexity. And folks are already changing their habits. It used to be you would search for any type of product, you would search in Google. But now, and it used to be you'd search in Google, you'd see a link to Amazon, you click and go to Amazon. You only have to do that 5 or 10 times. And then before you know it, now people just go to Amazon to search for something.
Yeah.
And now people are going to ChatGPT to search for something and they get the whole answer versus you go to Google and you have to go and click on things. So it's whoever has the shortest number of clicks tends to win. And so this is going to be something else that's going to revolutionize how the internet is supported financially. But at the end of the day, it's a win for us consumers because there's fewer steps for us to take to do the things that we need and want to do. Yeah. But people are always worried, am I so far behind the curve with AI? And I always say, don't worry. If your friends are up to date, they're going to be behind next week because it's moving so quick. You can jump in at any time you want because that's how rapidly things are changing. So don't worry about it.
I find, and so like then with the method by which you're using it with this combination of different marketing techniques, old and new, using the new in order to get a evolved, new, more accurate, understanding of things for people in like such a rapidly changing sort of environment. Where do you see, because you talk about GA4, so Google, for people, because a lot of people, I guess, I don't know whether you do, but I still occasionally forget that like lots of people who just running their businesses and doing things don't really even know what, Google Analytics is, or and generally don't have any reason to. So why would they? It's like me, like, why would I know about different plumbing stuff? Like I got no idea, so it's understandable, but like, where do you see like and like you were talking about search engines, like for the longest time, people have been, now used to, although still like a relatively short amount of time in the big scheme of things, like the internet and people searching, it seems like it's been forever. Where do you see the redundancy of that sort of method and it changing over to, like you were saying, using sort of AI-driven tools, then to be the new version of like, instead of people doing, say, the hard yards of searching themselves, they're using tools to search and do things for them. Where do you then see like the established tools, the search tools, they're obviously doing their own things to combat and to evolve themselves, right? Because Google and all the big names are using AI, but how far do you feel away in terms of time frame is the real redundancy of people searching in that traditional way? I know it's probably, it's going to be transitional, but how far do you feel that is away from changing over to a completely different, more AI-driven search? And then where does that fit in with what you do? Like, how's that going to change that? Or is it going to change it because you're already, doing things a particular way? I know there's like a few things to unpack there, but
no, it's a great.
I find it really fascinating. I like, as you're talking about it, because I hadn't really thought about like the whole, AI tools then becoming like including advertising. But I mean, it's a natural, I guess that's a very natural thing to happen in this world, that was going to happen. People want to make money out of it. They got new tools. They want to use them. So where's the demise of like traditional search here?
Well, I would say I would use as an example what we saw with Amazon. So Amazon now in the US is 35% of the search market. So 35% of all, 35%. So that happened a relatively short period of time, 3 years, maybe 4 years. ChatGPT, I think, is between that and the other tools is moving at a very rapid pace. So I would say, and they're adding new features very rapidly. And just this weekend, all of AI is kind of turned on its head because there's an open source engine from China called DeepSeek that was able to build something at the level of ChatGPT for under $100 million, and ChatGPT and others need billions of dollars. So that's going to upend everything, which is going to further accelerate this speed of development. So I think traditional searching, the way that we currently do it, I think we're going to see, already we're seeing there's a percentage of search going to ChatGPT, but I think that, why would you take 10 steps to do something when you can do it in 1 step? How many times does it take a human being to do something and learn a new skill, especially if it's easier for them? See, that's the thing, is that us humans, we don't like things that are more difficult. We typically don't like change, but we are addicted to saving time. That's one thing we do like, is we like to save time. So I think within 3 to 5 years, we're going to see a significant shift away from the traditional Google and Bing searches, more so towards these other AI engines that can give you
using voice maybe still too. Like maybe that becomes more prominent, because then that's very much sort of intertwined with AI tools. Because I just wonder still, is that the thing that I'm sort of thinking of, like, as you're speaking, is that, like, I 100% agree that people are addicted to now saving time. That's like really, it's sort of embedded in, it's almost like a requirement, which, you go back even the start of the 20th century, people, and before that, we talked about this, that sort of home, like a bit in terms of how people used to learn, how they used to teach, the time they would take to do things, and the perceived time saving. And I say perceived because, sometimes, like, it seems it has the perception of that you're saving time, but in the time that you've done that, you've also, like, searched or done a bunch of stuff that you would otherwise not have searched for or done, which is actually wasted time, because you've actually, like, searched for a bunch of things that have actually just taken you away from other stuff you should be doing. So, like, is it time saving? Like, it is on that one task, but, I just wonder whether, like other, cycles in technology, like social media, like, and I'm just talking, say, about, I mean, I'm probably reflective of like a certain percentage of the population. Like, I've completely, just because I have no interest anymore in, say, Facebook or social media, like I used to in the past, and just for whatever, just looking at general sort of rubbish, that people sort of put up, and just, sort of fun. And I don't anymore. And I actually just, like, have zero interest, like genuinely zero interest. I just use LinkedIn and, like, MySpace to Facebook, and, like, Facebook to no Facebook, or to whatever. I just wonder what will happen. And I feel like it might, but I mean, might be the complete opposite. is that people, like you're saying, there's this change of like how we search. I wonder if then, at a future point not too far away, people will get really sick of having more like, too much stuff done for them, and they'll, have certain realizations because there's certain like things that are time saving. But then the real kicker will be if the results long term after a point aren't sort of substantial, they're kind of superficial. And I'd use maybe as an example, say, it sort of requires on what they're searching for. Like say, because I've had feedback. I mean, I say when people search for our services and they're looking for like a brand agency, and like sometimes the future cost of what that is going to be means people search more and they'll go to the third page and they won't actually go only to the first page or the first result. And depending on what they're searching for, they'll do that. But say if they have to use their own judgment then in that and their own personal preferences, and they would come to ours as opposed to somebody else. If the tools, if and when the tools are so good that, perhaps there's an understanding of what people want, even with things like that, somehow, I'm not sure how, maybe by magic, who knows, but like it's just like pulled out of a hat. Well, it'll seem like that. Then after a while, people will actually go, actually the results will speak for themselves. If you know what I mean, like it'll either work or it won't, or they'll get sick of being too reliant and then they'll change. And I mean, that's kind of, a future debate, and it's going to depend on, people in general about what they like. But, what do you like? That's not, I suppose that's not really, that's more of a commentary about what I think as opposed to like a question. But like with then your tools now, like I feel like people will still always, especially when there's money involved and companies want to understand, how people are buying things, that, what you're doing, like the tools might still change and obviously evolve like they have in your history anyway from like the previous company. There's a big shake up that I feel like that's always going to be still really important to, for people to like still to know. It's like I'm spending what's my return? Like that's not gonna, I feel like that wouldn't change. Like, what do you think? Do you see any like shift in how companies that you sort of speak and work with view that? Is that becoming like, is it as important as ever? Or is there like any shift there?
I can tell you that for larger companies, which are our primary clients, besides headcount, their employees, the number one line item in their budget is advertising. And so it's something that has the full attention of the board of directors and the C-level, and being able to optimize that line item so you can squeeze more revenue out of the same spend or cut it and get the same spend.
Yeah.
That's incredibly important. That's and when you're talking,
always will be, won't it? Like it will be. Yeah. It'll always be important.
Yeah. When you're talking about companies that are spending hundreds of millions to billions of dollars a year, an improvement of efficiency of 3 or 4% is a significant amount of money. What's going to change is how they get their messages out to people, the places that they advertise, and the techniques are going to change. But we built our engine to be future-proofed in that sense, so that there's the type of data we need. Whenever you spend dollars to advertise, you always know how much you spent, and they always tell you how many people you reached. That's the only information we need to get our engines working. So we built it in such a way, knowing that what we know of today is there's one thing certain about the future. It's going to change without a doubt. So you want to build a system that can adapt to that. My other company, it was the early days of the internet and it was the wild, wild west. And so it was built for an emerging industry with the available tools that were there. But I've been at this long enough to know that we want to put in tool sets that can last through a generation for a team of marketers.
Yeah, it's a really, my mind's just kind of ticking away with all this. I find it really fascinating because I'm sort of starting with a lot of existing tools that people use on our amazing sort of smartphones that analyze sort of imagery in such a sophisticated way and audio. I feel like not being like Mark Zuckerberg, I have no idea, but but I feel like these current trends, one, because they're for the most part genuinely useful tools, like to be able to in terms of speed, I guess fun, things mixing with augmented reality, and the fact then that like we touched on before, like the hardware, like the combination of sophisticated hardware that can handle all the mathematics and the calculations that go into that can just like spit it out of our smartphones, which does appear like certainly like it's so seamless, and it's going to get like only better, that those tools of sort of audio and visual search, or however that kind of evolves. I feel given the tools and given how they're improving, for me the natural sort of evolution of that is more of that and less of it'll be like and that I guess ties into potential greater importance of things like podcasts and just audio content, because one, it's it's like it can be quite engaging. In a busy world, there's that sort of irony that I've sort of experienced myself, like listening when I'm like doing other things like driving. I can't watch a video because I'll have a crash, and and it's like really dangerous and it's illegal. But you can listen and you can and so I've gone personally, and I know this is like from other friends and other people, like audio content, not just podcasts, but audio books. I've just like devoured like huge amounts of content, which I would otherwise, there wasn't a plan. I wasn't going, I'm going to become like an audio book connoisseur. It was like, it just happened because it was really convenient. And I do it all the time while I'm doing other things. So I find, and that's seems to be like the consequence then of a busier world, because then I'm always doing it while I'm doing other stuff, and not all tasks, but certain things. So like audio content, sophisticated AI analysis of visuals to better understand things and give information. What do you think about that in terms of like where we'll call it search still for now, might call something else, and I mean that will still probably always make sense, but maybe it'll be more like input and you let things do, and it's still kind of search. I mean, there's obviously there's a transition happening now, which is like happening fast. But what do you think about that in terms of the methods by which human input, what that'll look like in, say, even like a year from now, like say start of next year, start of 2026. What do you reckon, Jeff?
Well, I think more audio is going to be involved. People will use more voice. I think it's going to be interesting to see, but to touch on a couple of things that you said, I think as humans, we do have an addictiveness. I said earlier about doing things quickly, but I think the reason that we're addicted to that is that we like to be busy. There's, especially in the
Mm,
Western world, we're addicted to this busyness, and we tend to, especially younger people, tend to try to do as many things as possible. I was fascinated to see my young members of my team that will be coding and watching a video game or playing a video game and watching a video on YouTube while listening to a podcast all at the same time. And I have no idea how they do that, but I think that, our culture has lost this ability to have some quietness, and
mm,
that we've lost this. It's not cool to not have anything to do. It's not cool to chill. I think the coolest thing in the world is to do less versus more, to have good conversations. That to me is
mm,
one of the best things. But and so I think what is going to happen is I think these tools are there's going to go in a direction where it's going to enable humans to be even busier, to do more stuff, which
mm.
is not necessarily a good thing, but sometimes, the pendulum has to swing to get to that point of maximum impact where it then decides to come back. And then I think there'll be a little bit of a pushback where I think, just like how you've decided to get off of Facebook, because you probably had the realization that, my God, these videos aren't really adding anything to my quality of life.
Yeah, I just find them like it sounds, I'm sure some people listening would be like, what, you're kidding? Because it's not just, in my perception anyway, it's not just like that I find it boring. It's that I was actually do like I don't find YouTube boring because there's a lot of specific content. Like I like playing squash, and so I'm like watching like squash all the time, and like other things in the general smattering of sort of rubbish too, like a lot of people. So I'm not all of a sudden like you know, Mr. like anti-internet because I'm like far from that. Because it's my industry too. I just find Facebook particularly really boring. And so, but it's also these sort of platforms and structures are like a culturally embedded, activity too. So when you don't sort of do them, because I didn't actually, interestingly, I just decided, I was like, well, I'm not going to get off Facebook because I know like sometimes members of my family, they still use it to communicate and if there was anything important. So I thought I'm just going to keep it. And I literally just, it's interesting because I actually did this like literally yesterday. And so for people that I know listening, if you find that you've been unfriended all of a sudden, I'm sorry, it's not personal. It's just, it's just that, so I still like you. But there's, I always feel like that's a deliberately sort of intentional term, like to unfriend because it sounds negative. Because it does. It's like if you're like, I'm not your friend anymore when you unfriend. But yeah, I just went, okay, however many hundreds I had, I just got rid of all of them except for my family because well, I've got other things I want to do. I want to spend my time and I haven't been using it anyway. So, but that, it gets back to what I was saying before and what you just touched on was there's always like this sort of naturally evolving cycles in nature. And I feel in its own funny way, there's these naturally occurring, cycles that I've already seen like since the start of the internet to how websites are made, how people use them, how they interact with them. When, smartphones came into being, more and more people's interaction is more on mobile and, there's a move away to some extent from social media to different versions of it and different way people are ingesting content. And there will be like you said, you used the term sort of pushback. I feel that that will be like definitely a naturally occurring thing that'll just happen with certain groups of people. People will go, you know, I mean, it's happening now. Like people going, you know, this is too much. Like, you know, kids are on the phones too much. It's having this impact, and it is. But there's, you know, there's also, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater because there's a lot of good too. But then that process, that natural process that will happen, it to some extent dictates, you know, just by people's input or lack of input. Like it's, you know, it's like when people talk about the real estate market and they go, the market will decide, which I always find sort of annoying when real estate agents like say that to you. They go, the market will decide. And then sometimes I've thought about it, I go, well, that is true. Like the market will decide because even though the market's not an actual thing, like it's just like a conglomeration of like opinions and stuff, you know, but like people going, enough people, which happened with like MySpace, you know, MySpace is like the classic example. And I remember, which I still find funny that I remember this, I remember almost the day when I had my MySpace page and thought it looked amazing. And it was like really a dog's breakfast, like everyone's was, because they just sort of, but everyone was like, this is amazing. And then I remember seeing in a very short amount of time Facebook and looking at that and going, gee, it looks boring. Like there's not much. It looks really sort of unappealing. And then I think about a week later, I had the polar opposite opinion, which I still find kind of remarkable of going, this looks really messy and this is more content focused. And then I changed it over Facebook, like everyone else in the world, it seems overnight. It's like the market decides, like for whatever that is, despite, you know, huge influences. What do you think about that, Jeff, in
Well,
terms of
it's kind of like when you hear a song the first time and you don't like the way it feels, and then you hear it the second time and you get more used to it. But I think in the case that you're talking about, maybe there's a layer here that's going on in the collective world that we're not aware of. Like one of the things that we know is that there's certain plants that when deer start eating them or animals start eating them, that they can send off a warning sign to plants a half a mile away, and then that they're being attacked, and that then there'll be a tart taste in the leaves that will turn them off. So, you know, and I think we started our discussion before this talking about, you know, there's more that we don't know than what we do know, but maybe there's something that, you know, you loved your MySpace page and then you saw Facebook and you didn't think it was that great, but as more people started seeing Facebook, maybe there's something out there in the air, something in the ether that
a collective. Yeah. I mean, there's
a collective feeling that,
it's like,
you know, an emotional state that gets picked up, you know, now can we measure it at Provalytics? Not yet, but it's but
that's the next evolution of your tools, Jeff.
It is, yeah. But we do see these trends that happen that you wonder, like, how do they get picked up, especially when you see it getting picked up in different parts of the world where people aren't connected through social media and stuff. It's, you know, again, you know, there's so much that we know in terms of understanding the world that we live in, and yet there's so little that we really know at the end of the day.
It sounds like, I mean, the term that some people that have heard when they refer to that is now sort of quantum entanglement. It's like where energy meets mind and all that, which I find really interesting. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of, there's a lot more unknown than there is known, I feel. But like from what we do know about like what you're talking about and what businesses ultimately at the end of the day want to know, like for people to then to find out more about what you do. Like we'll have a link in the description for the podcast too, but where do they go? Can you just tell them the URL?
Yeah, they would go to provalytics.com. And one of the things that we kind of talked about is we talked about how we talked earlier on about the dominoes falling. One of the things that we've also done is we've put together a certification course
Right.
That folks can go through, and it takes about an hour and a half, 2 hours. There's a quiz afterwards. You pass it. You are deemed then attribution certified, and you get a certificate for your LinkedIn. But it helps strengthen the foundation for marketers in terms of understanding the past, the present, and the future of what's coming when it comes to this whole new marketing world that we're dealing with.
What would you say to people? Like, you may have had to say this lots of times, so forgive me for if that's the case of having to repeat it. But like when people go, well, Jeff, like I've seen, a million and one tools out there that say that they do this and this. You know how people get really jaded, and they're so like swamped. What's the sort of the key thing that you would generally say, like and we've gone over some of this, but just to kind of distill it into like a nice, clear sort of thing that you might say in your like elevator pitch, to somebody, what would you say to them and go, well, it's different because of this, like as opposed to, X?
When I talk to folks, when people ask questions like that, every tool out there that I compete with is great.
Yeah.
They all do great things. I think it's our approaches and the problems that we're helping people solve.
Yeah.
Our problem that we're helping marketers solve is that marketing has to rely upon finance to get the money and the budgets to spend those dollars. And there's a disconnect between those two teams because they're looking at different sets of books. And we work to solve for an organization to create a single source of marketing truth to get all the teams aligned. So everyone's looking at the same books. So I would say, do we do things better than our competitors? Sure. There's a laundry list of things, but I'd say we're pretty much the same thing. The difference is the problems that we're looking to solve. And the folks that we're looking to solve them for, our customers are larger customers that have these major issues that they're dealing with. And yes, the tool can solve it and it solves the math part, but there's that human element that is where our team comes in and really shines. I think that's what makes us different.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And I was sort of edging, I guess, in a way towards that because I find that there's the interesting or seemingly irony, but it's not really. It gets back to like the good things that, when technology or like any tool, because ultimately at the end of the day, they're just like really great tools, but like that point of difference, which is always, you could almost argue that's always the thing that people do actually resonate with both. And it gets back to the problem solving, the creative problem solving thing we were talking about before, about that. Yeah, at the end of the day with human input and actually going, okay, so what is even like, it's okay going problem solving, but if you don't work out what the real problem is, then you can't solve it. Like you got to, at the end of the day, it's like the old, if you don't know what the goal is and you got a bow and arrow, well, you can never hit it, obviously. Like it's just never, like you might get lucky, but and that seems to be at the heart of what you were saying is that you've, to actually, what's the real problem? It's like, it's that people aren't talking to each other. And and I mean, look, I completely resonate with that, because that's, I mean, story of my life, like a lot of times. And it's not because of anyone, often, willfully, not wanting to talk to other people. I mean, sometimes it sort of is, but but it's often, marketing team, we're doing design. There's like a business coach. They've got their agenda or thoughts and preferences. This person has theirs, and nobody's talking to each other. Or they sort of are, but they're not really. And I've always found in its own, not exactly the same thing that we're talking about, but it feels like a similar comparison, is that I've always found, say, when we've had an opportunity, for whatever reason, where there's, a client who's got a business, and they've got a business coach or an advisor, and then we're working closely for whatever reason with that advisor, then everything sort of magically seems to work out really, really well. Because, and I've often reflected on that, and I thought it's just a really simple answer. It's that you're just communicating better. It doesn't, sometimes it still takes a while to like get across stuff, but at least like you're doing it. And that gets back to like, you've got a tool that can integrate stuff, so everyone's on the same page. It's kind of gets, ironically, with all the technology, gets back to just human stuff at the end of the day. And that's, I mean, it's not rocket science, is it? It's just actually really sort of basic, but it's often overlooked because like the tools are really sort of cool, and, and justifiably so. I mean, I use different, analytics tools too, and they look great, especially with a great user interface. And they can be deceptively, they can steer you down, like, the focus becomes different sometimes, but, there's a range of reasons. But, so Jeff, like we talked about at the start, before the podcast, that you were going to give us a quote or some quotes. It's something I do in every podcast about, or talk about, or something that you like. So what have you got?
I've got a quote right here that my wife got me that I love. These two business quotes. One is, "What would you attempt to do if you knew you could not fail?" I don't know who said it, but I love it. The other is,
that's a good one.
Yeah. The other is an Einstein quote. "If at first the idea is not absurd, then there is no hope for it."
I haven't heard that one either. I've heard a lot of, they're good.
Quotes.
That's a good, that's good. It's really true though. I heard, actually just like on a similar vein, I just stumbled across in my general YouTube rabbit hole. I saw Elon Musk talking. He was at some, open forum thing, and there was a guy, who was asking some questions, and Elon Musk, and it was about entrepreneurship. And I think the guy said something along the lines of like, what would you sort of say to encourage like, more young people to, to do startups or to become like a, entrepreneur? And he was like, well, like if you actually sort of need encouragement to do it, you probably shouldn't do it, And I thought, yeah, too true. There's like it's like it gets back to the grit, and like, and he said, and then he had some other some other thing that I'm probably gonna mess up, is like someone who told him is like, being a business owner, entrepreneur is like eating glass, whilst doing something else, and it's like, it's just really hard. So if you're not up for like pain and anguish, like, leading up to other things. Like if you're not up for that, you probably shouldn't do it. And yeah, I mean, that's true. There's different levels, but like it's been a very, very interesting conversation, Jeff, and I hope that everyone sort of listening has got something out of, like, I think, like, where things are perhaps going to, but the fact that it came back to human things is interesting at the end of the day.
That's what it's all about at the end of the day, is we're the ones that all these tools are for. And yet we sometimes are so busy, we forget that.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very true. Have you got any other parting words for everybody listening, Jeff?
It's just been I think that more people should take time to chill and have wonderful conversations like this, Saul. I think that's really what it comes down to.
It's true. It is really true. And and once again, I think, like, the proof's in the pudding, right? Like someone said at some point, some person who made pudding, no doubt, but like like the results you get, like how, I sort of like feel after, I think, like every single podcast I do, I can only go on the proof about, like, why, say, I even keep doing this. And it's actually primarily because it's actually got nothing to do with, marketing or anything. That's obviously in the mix, but it's because I enjoy it. And because I really like finding out, from people like yourself about, like, why you're doing things and how you're helping people. It's really interesting. And there's a lot to be said for that, I reckon, like, for just simple enjoyment, because it has that flow on effect, right?
Everything old is new again. Yeah, I think, so many people today don't communicate because they've got their noses in their phones. So I think the nice thing about podcasting is that it's bringing back the art of conversation. And we're keeping it alive, one conversation at a time.
We sure are, Jeff. Yeah. No, it's true though. It's true. And I think that's why I think it's a great example of things that people kind of didn't always realize that they did love and enjoy until it becomes popular again. And then they're like, oh, actually, it's not really true. Like, it is true that people have short attention spans, but then people having the willingness to listen to really long podcasts flies in the face of that supposed evidence.
Right.
So therefore, it's not about that. It's actually about something else. But just thanks again, Jeff. It's been really great conversation, and everyone listening, thank you once again for listening in, and we'll say goodbye. Say goodbye to everyone, Jeff.
Well, goodbye, everyone. Thanks so much, Saul. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Grow Your Business. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time here at the Grow Your Business podcast.